Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Micheal Rivero, founder and editor of WhatReallyHappened.com. Welcome to the show, Micheal.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully you had a joyful Valentine's Day.
Well, it was kind of low-key. I mean, Claire and I just doing what Claire and I do.
Micheal, Justice Scalia of the U.S. Supreme Court is dead, and there might be suspicions behind his demise?
Yeah, it's a very suspicious situation. He was out in Texas at this resort that's owned by John Poindexter, who's been tangled in with the government, was part of the Reagan administration, was even implicated in some of the scandals with that, and this is his retirement out there. Scalia went out there, did not have any personal security, and apparently was at dinner. Everybody said he was energetic, he was happy, he seemed to be in fine shape, and he finally said, I'm tired, I'm going to go to bed. The next morning he did not show up for breakfast. They didn't think anything about it. They came back lunchtime to check on him, and according to John Poindexter himself, they found Scalia on the bed in his room. The bed had not been turned down or slept in. It was still made. He was lying laid out in repose with a pillow over his head, and at that point they said, okay, we've got a dead body here, and they called a sheriff, and the sheriff called a justice of the peace in Texas, and the sheriff said, this is a heart attack, we don't need an autopsy. The justice of the peace said, yeah, I will sign the order saying we don't need an autopsy. The body was then shipped out to a funeral home. It's already been embalmed. Now, there are a lot of reasons to be concerned about this. First of all, this is the highest U.S. government official to be killed in office since John F. Kennedy. In most other states, a death unattended by a doctor, there has to be an autopsy. Texas is one of the rare exceptions. There was a second justice of the peace who came forward to say that if they'd been asked, they would have ordered an autopsy because of the situation here. The other thing you need to remember, of course, is that a heart attack is very painful. People don't just lie still while it's happening. They thrash around, they fall on the floor, they vomit, they soil themselves, they're struggling to reach a telephone. They don't just lie there, laid out straight on the bed, waiting to die. It doesn't work that way. The other situation, of course, is the sheriff is not trained to deal with determining a cause of death other than things which are visible on the body, like a knife, gunshot, bludgeoning, things like that. For a body with no marks on it, the sheriff isn't qualified to say, yeah, this is a heart attack. He doesn't know. There was nobody present there with the training or the necessary equipment to determine that Scalia died of a heart attack. It was just, this is what they said, that's what the media said, it went on out, and there's been an immediate backlash at this rush to judgment, and especially with this rush to have the body embalmed. It's like when they grabbed John F. Kennedy's body from Texas and flew it back to Washington, D.C., even though under the laws of that time, Texas had jurisdiction to investigate the case. And so at this point, everybody's first assumption is Scalia was assassinated for some political gain. We don't know why. And people are making the inevitable allusions to the Pelican Brief, which is a book by John Grisham, which was made into a movie of the same name starring Denzel Washington and Julia Roberts. And so this idea of a Supreme Court justice being assassinated for political gain is already in the public consciousness. Apparently Obama's statement about the death of Scalia, the journalists there were just remarking how he seemed to be stumbling around and not really in command of the moment. But at this point, yeah, there's something very questionable about this. There is no question. It should have been handled differently. We're being told that the family wants privacy, the family wants no autopsy, the family wants a funeral, but we haven't heard from the family themselves. We're being told what the family wants by everybody but the family members themselves.
Should other justices on the U.S. Supreme Court be nervous?
I imagine that may be one reason for making this assassination as obvious as it was to send that message. There's a big fight brewing over whether Obama should try and nominate a new liberal Supreme Court justice. Scalia was, of course, very conservative. He was very much a supporter of the original Constitution and its original intent. Gun rights groups are already saying that the Supreme Court is now down to just one justice who still supports the Second Amendment. And there are a number of interesting Supreme Court cases coming up, including possibly a challenge to Ted Cruz's running for president on the basis that he does not meet the constitutional requirement of being a natural-born U.S. citizen. So there's all kinds of interest in what cases were going to come up that Scalia would have been ruling on. But there's now a Supreme Court vacancy. The political dimensions of this are all over the place. And, of course, for Hillary, this is a good thing because all of a sudden the corporate media has something to talk about other than her email server, the classified documents on it now numbering over 1,600, and whether or not she may have been selling U.S. classified information to foreign governments in exchange for donations to her charitable foundation.
What about Hillary being booed when she suggested Americans should not dream of change?
Well, I think that is a very telling moment because Americans do want change. The fact that Hillary is not holding her own against Bernie Sanders, together with Trump's ascendancy, shows the American people have had it with politics as usual, business as usual. They want the establishment out. They want new people in. And it is amazing watching these entrenched political parties, the lengths they're going to try and maintain the status quo.
You mentioned going into the primaries before that Microsoft was controlling the votes. We saw Hillary win very closely over Bernie Sanders. Were the last ones in New Hampshire just so obvious there was no way they could cook it?
Well, they wound up cooking it anyway because of the so-called superdelegates. And the superdelegates are already pledged to Hillary. So Hillary came out, Bernie Sanders had an almost 2-to-1 lead over her in the popular vote, but somehow Hillary came out with 2 more delegates than Bernie Sanders did. And Sanders supporters are outraged, as well they should be, over, what amounts to a theft of Bernie's victory in New Hampshire. And it's provoked a backlash. Bernie Sanders supporters are getting ready to mount legal challenges against the model of the superdelegates because the superdelegates exist so the party officials can overturn the choice of their party voters, and that is not democracy in action.
Talking about democracy, the new X-Files episodes that were filmed in Vancouver, they're suggesting that the world police already exist. Do they already exist? I
don't know that they already exist, but we're certainly seeing a push toward that. We're seeing a push for a nationalized police force here in the United States of America. We know that organizations like the FBI are already exerting jurisdiction over the entire world, even though they're technically not supposed to operate outside the U.S. borders. And again, as part of this larger agenda of a new world order, single global government, obviously they would want a single global police force to enforce their will on the debt slaves.
The new science fiction show Colony, where aliens have taken over the Earth, it seems to me it's an analogy of how the billionaires have taken over the Earth.
I have to admit I have not seen the show yet, but I will take a look at it. There's a lot of metaphor out there that is already talking about what's going on. I think that was the reason for the stunning success of the Matrix trilogy, is because everybody understood the Matrix to be a metaphor for our current media-dominated illusion that we all live our lives in. But there's another series out now called Elementary. It's a remake of the Sherlock Holmes story. They're hitting some very current topics, and it seems like at least some of the productions that are being done in other countries are willing to trespass on areas that productions made inside the United States of America dare not go.
Syria was said to be close to a peace agreement. Then somehow 3 hospitals get bombed.
Well, it's the hospitals were bombed by U.S. military forces. The U.S. is saying, no, it wasn't us. It was the Russians and the Syrians. Doctors Without Borders are saying, we know what American aircraft look like. The U.S. does not want a peace settlement in Syria. They want Assad out. They want a compliant U.S. puppet ruler in. Russia has exposed to the world that the U.S. war against ISIS inside Syria was an absolute hoax because the U.S. was never bombing and attacking ISIS. They were destroying civilian economic infrastructure. They've caused billions of dollars of damage to Syria. And, of course, when the new U.S. puppet ruler is in Damascus, the International Monetary Fund will graciously agree to loan huge amounts of money to Syria to replace what the U.S. destroyed at hideous interest rates and trap Syria in debt slavery. That's what this is all about, trapping the world in unpayable debt to hold them as slaves.
Canada has withdrawn their jet bombers now from the conflict, and they say they're going to provide more training for Kurdish forces. Doesn't that set up the possibility that NATO forces in Turkey will end up attacking the Canadians who are with the Kurds?
Yeah, it's a mess. We've already got U.S. allies are fighting against the CIA-backed terrorist groups. They've turned this into a complete free-for-all and a mess. Nobody knows who's working for who, or who's the good guy or who's the bad guy.
And of course, Canada's already had friendly fire casualties helping the Kurds. Why do you think the government would go from the relative safety of 30,000 feet to down on the ground?
Which government are you talking about?
The Canadian government.
The Canadian. I think the reason they wanted to call off the airstrikes is because Russia has, for all intents and purposes, established a no-fly zone over Syria. If you're not a Russian plane or a Syrian plane, and you don't have their permission to be there, you could be shot down. Now, Israel has succeeded in violating that with impunity a couple of times, but ever since Russia basically got in there with their air cover, and especially those S-400 surface-to-air missiles, the British and American airstrikes have all but stopped. And I think that was the reason why Canada pulled on out, because they don't want to be seen as provoking Russia at this point. The goal is to somehow make Russia look like the aggressor, to make Russia look like they're making the first move that will lead to what is apparently the opening salvos of World War III.
With low oil prices, what's the U.S. excuse for being involved in the Middle East?
Well, the U.S. public face for being involved in the Middle East is always, oh, this country is under the grip of a dictator. We have to invade to bring them democracy. It's a humanitarian intervention. But what's really at stake here is the U.S. economy is in serious, serious danger. And it goes back to the end of World War II and the Bretton Woods Agreement, which made the U.S. dollar the global trade and banking currency, off of which the U.S. economic system made a handsome profit. Now, Richard Nixon wrecked that system when he ended gold convertibility for the U.S. dollar, and it was replaced with a mechanism called the petrodollar, where the U.S. went to all these oil-producing nations in the Middle East and said, as long as you sell your oil only to the U.S. dollar and invest those dollars back in the U.S., buying treasury bonds and such, we will guarantee your military safety against other nations that might threaten you, meaning, of course, Israel. But ever since 9/11, Israel has just been running rampant all over the Middle East. They've been attacking Syria, Lebanon, Palestine time after time. And these other Middle Eastern nations are now realizing that the U.S. cannot keep their end of the petrodollar deal. So back in 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro. 1 year later, screaming he's got nuclear weapons, he's coming to get us, the U.S. goes in, invades Iraq, kills Saddam Hussein, puts Iraq's oil back on the world market only for the U.S. dollar. Then you had Gaddafi over in Libya, who was doing wonderful things for Libya, and all of a sudden he says, we're going to have a state central bank, we're going to shut down the private central bank, we're going to have a new currency based on value, the gold dinar, and if you want to buy Libya's oil, you have to pay for it in the gold dinar. U.S. goes into Libya, claiming they're freeing the Libyans from an evil tyrant, kill Gaddafi, set up a new private central bank, the gold for the gold dinar vanished, and Libya's oil is back on the world market, but only for the U.S. dollar. And basically that's what it is. The U.S. economy has lost its manufacturing, and nobody wants our agriculture because of GMO. If the U.S. can't keep the world having to use the U.S. dollar for cross-border trade and banking, there's nothing left to prop up the U.S. economy. It's going to implode. And that's why this new world war is shaping up. It's a war between the U.S. dollar and the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan.
We'll have more with Micheal Rivero right after the break.
Unbelievable harmony, spectacular performance, the ultimate tribute to the Everly Brothers and Simon and Garfunkel. Bird Dog and the Vintage Electric Band coming to Fort Langley, Mission, White Rock, West Vancouver. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Micheal Rivero. The airlines are accused of really scamming their customers. Fuel prices have dropped 70% in the last 2 years, yet transatlantic air fees have only dropped 2%, and some airlines are still charging fuel surcharges. How much of a scam is that?
It is a scam, and we're seeing it even at the gas pumps with our cars. Yes, gas prices have gone down a little bit, but not to the degree that should be reflected with the plunging price of oil. The oil companies and the airlines and everybody else are taking advantage of the situation to maximize their profits and keep their stockholders happy.
I know the excuse the oil companies are using is, well, we're making so little at the wellhead, we have to nail you at the pump.
Well, that's kind of a scam, because what they're doing at the wellhead is they're spending money, and they're spending a lot less of it now. So this idea that somehow they're taking a loss at the wellhead, that doesn't play out anymore. I mean, if you look at the distribution chain, everybody along the way is making more money with these low oil prices. The ones who are losing at the wellhead are the actual oil drillers and pumpers, but they're not part of the gasoline companies. They're separate concerns, and they are in serious trouble.
In show business, at the Screen Actor Guild Awards, lots of black people won awards, and yet nobody nominated in the acting categories at the Academy Awards who's of color. Why?
There's a lot of politics in all of these awards. In fact, Jackie Mason literally came out today and said that anybody who supports the boycott of Israel should be blacklisted from Hollywood. But of course, if you say the Jews are controlling Hollywood, you're just a filthy anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. It is very political. There's a lot of varied interests in there, and the awards are unfortunately rarely handed out solely on the basis of merit.
I was going to say, there is so much talent out there, and I think because the actors are voting for the acting awards, there's much less bias. They understand a good job when they see one.
Yeah, they generally do, and the Actors for Actors Awards are a little less politicized, but it's still a factor. The Academy Awards are dominated by political agenda. When Avatar was up for Best Picture, to me, it's still my all-time favorite movie. But it lost out to Hurt Locker because Hurt Locker supported the war agenda, and Avatar was a very much anti-corporation, anti-war statement. And so it was basically relegated. I think it was 3 years ago, the best documentary went to Inside Job about the Wall Street meltdown. And it won the Oscar, but it promptly disappeared and was replaced by this HBO made-for-TV movie that tried to portray all the Wall Street bankers in 2008 as heroic guys stuck in difficult circumstances and doing their best, and we know that's absolutely not true. I remember one incident that shows how economics will come into that. I worked on a film called Stargate, and we got nominated for an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, and we should have won. But the Academy Awards has something called the Blue Ribbon Committee. Kind of like the film industry's version of the superdelegates, there to overrule the voters when the need arises. And Stargate had come out from a company called Carolco, which was on the verge of collapse because of some financial and tax issues. So they literally kicked our film out of the running for Best Visual Effects, and because Carolco couldn't maximize the award economically by selling more tickets. And they want the winners of the awards to be in a position to take those awards and generate more money. And so it went, the Academy Award nomination and eventual award went to Speed, about this bus running around with explosions and fire, and it didn't have anywhere near the quality visual effects that we did. But economics, picked the winner there because that movie could take the Oscar and generate more sales and tickets with it, whereas Carolco was not in a position to exploit it. And that's a lot of the thinking that goes into who gets the awards. And yes, there is always that bias behind the scene that if you're a friend of Israel, you will get awards, and if you're not, you will be ignored. If you go back and you look at Steven Spielberg, who we all understand is a fine film director, he didn't win his first Oscar until he made Schindler's List.
Very interesting. Michael, anything else you wanted to throw in today?
Well, these are very interesting times, and I mean that in both the good and bad sense. I don't think the wet work is going to stop with Justice Scalia. This is going to be a very interesting year, and I seriously doubt the United States is going to get to the end of 2016 without some major structural changes politically, economically, to our nation, and they may not be better, unfortunately.
Michael, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to The Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on The Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at talkdigitalnetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.